Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart, and I'm here to have a conversation with my good friend and our host, Peter Scalzo, and we're going to jump into a new topic today.
Hey, Sean.
Hey, Peter. And if you're watching this live, Peter is a new winter outfit, so you'll find that we have an updated podcast now.
I don't have many clothes, so
The minimalist lifestyle. I like
the
this.
minimalist lifestyle.
I like it. Yeah.
Same socks the whole time. No, I'm just.
So that's not our topic. However much we could talk about that for an hour, I'm sure it would be easy, right?
Yeah, I think.
But we're going to talk about something else today, and it's something I think we were both just wrestling with in your current journey, and even I'm wrestling with this too, and we're my journey, and in the whole concept, it's something we talk about in recovery a lot, and it's depending on your higher power. And so we talk about this in recovery. If you were to go to an AA, they're going to ask you to find in higher power, because part of the journey of going through the 12 steps of AA is to depend on your higher power. So does that resonate with you too in that sense?
Yeah, and I think for me, the first step of even going through the doors of recovery, that was the critical step, which really talks about, am I in a place where I recognize that I am powerless? And you talked about accepting my powerlessness. But that was a journey to accept the fact that, I've strong Christian, been a Christian a long time, but there were all these areas in my life that I didn't reveal to anyone else that made me a mess, basically. And I had to accept the fact that I didn't have power over not only those areas, but I found out my relationships, my life. I have power over my choices to respond, but especially in the cancer space. The journey's just ongoing. And if there's any journey I've ever been on that has really displayed that I don't have power over it, it's that journey, the cancer journey.
Yeah. So I think we're planning on this to be a 2-part discussion. And in our next episode, we're going to talk about where you're at in your cancer journey and this stage of powerlessness. So it's going to be an important thing just to kind of share an update. Hey, here's what's going on right now. This is how it's impacting you. And so it's part of what's driving this conversation of depending on a higher power. And I think it's our take here that everyone who's listening and paying attention to this podcast should really take time to wrestle with this concept. Are you working in your own power, or do you have a dependence on a higher power? And we're going to point to, both of us have a higher power who is Jesus Christ. And if you were to go to a recovery meeting that we go to, then that's a kind of a given that with the focus of Jesus as your higher power. If you were to go to an AA, they would ask you to choose a higher power. And I think it's important to figure out, hey, is there a higher power? Is there a power greater than myself that I can put my life and will into their care and control? And so that's a lot of what happens in that journey. But I think a cancer journey is that same invitation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And when you say, how'd you say, put my life and will
into the care and control?
Yeah. So that's that big surrender piece. Am I willing to surrender to my higher power? That's a huge question for me.
Yeah. And we're going to really delve into like this whole idea of accessing your higher power, and how do you, and what are the things that you should think about and consider, and what does it look like? What does it look like for you? What does it look like for me? Today, what I think our focus is to think about, is there a higher power? And if so, understand that a little bit more. And coming from a Christian worldview, I had pointed back to this. There was a passage in Matthew 16, and it's a really cool passage because you have in Matthew 15, you're coming off of Jesus doing miraculous things. He literally heals a whole bunch of people that are sick, and they're following him around, listening to his teachings. And they had followed him for like 3 days and run out of food, and people were famished. And so Jesus like, hey, we can't leave them in this position where they're going to faint on the trip home. And so he finds 7 loaves and he feeds 4,000 plus people off of the 7 loaves. And so you see this really miraculous event, and he sends the disciples to their next destination, and he shows up with them, and there's a conversation going on because they didn't bring bread along. And they're going, hey, what are we going to do? We don't have any food. And you can imagine, you just, saw these great works, and the disciples are going, we don't know what to do because we didn't bring bread with us. And it kind of speaks to something that happens inside of, I think, all of us. It is, we work in these big ups and downs, and you might be in a cycle of your life going, I feel like things are bad and getting worse, and there's not hope for something here, I guess. Does that resonate at all, that you kind of go through these things, even though you might have seen the mountaintop, or you've seen today, there's no bread. Yeah. And so that was, you see the storyline playing up to that point, and then, and Jesus uses a bread analogy. And he's like, hey, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So that's what he says to the disciples. And they kind of start out with, okay, so he's talking about bread because we're hungry and we didn't bring any bread. And so what do we do? And before long, Jesus is like, no, we're not talking about bread. We're talking about the teachings of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And that is important for the context of this conversation, because the teachings of the Pharisees and the Sadducees was, the Sadducees did not believe in an afterlife. They did not believe in any miraculous power of God. And that is a bit of what I think we might find in a lot of our secular culture today, is a very naturalistic approach to a faith journey, or to a cancer journey. Probably as you walk in, is like, hey, I need to do this on my own. All there is nature and me, and whatever the medical community can do. That's it. And I think what you're going to tell me is that's not a true narrative. Is that accurate, or to share a bit?
Yeah, I mean, on the one view of sort of stripping the power of God out of my journey. I mean, I have relied on Jesus, depended on him through the entire journey, but for me, it's been an unfolding of what that means to actually surrender and trust, because at first, for 10 years, I had surgical solutions, and it was really difficult, really tough surgeries, lots of them, and lots of changes to my body, to my life, everything. But after 10 years, it became metastatic, and so that meant death, pain, suffering, and death. And so if I was in that camp, it would be, okay, naturalists or medical community, whatever it is, what have you for me, to resolve this, because I can't rely on God. This is something that man has to come up with a solution for. So that would have been very meaningless and hopeless for me.
You wouldn't say this for yourself, but I'm going to put some context on it for our listeners or viewers. And we were talking a few minutes ago, and you, a week ago, was sitting in your surgeon's office. I had
surgery a week ago. Yeah.
Your surgeon said to you that, hey, I've done over 50 procedures on you, Peter. And so that's mind numbing to think about, like 50 surgical procedures, and it doesn't count all these others. That's just your surgeon since, I think it was what you said, 2011. And so I just think our viewers, like, understanding how strong this is and how much has been done in this space. And there's nothing wrong. It is just literally, that's been the journey of going through this medical journey of doing all that is available for.
I mean, we all have our own unique medical journeys, and they're all significant. One's not worse than the other or whatever necessarily when we talk about how we're processing it, right? Somebody might get a cancer diagnosis and it's resolved within 3 months, but that diagnosis and the process through it could have been the worst thing that they've ever had to deal with. For me, it's been 18, almost 19 years now of constant. I mean, 6 recurrences. Every time you get a recurrence, it's another crucible that you have to enter into and process. And so that's just recurrences. I just had a PET scan and procedure last week to look for cancer. It is constant. It's constant. And it is more than I can handle. I mean, I have a therapist, and I've talked about, at times it feels like torture. But
that's what I was going to highlight. There's a level of suffering there that I think, our cancer patients here are really going to identify with. Look, I just got my physical last week. Well, it cost me, an hour of time and getting stuck a few times or whatever, but that's just a physical, like to live a life where like the constant appointments and the time that is there, and then the poking, the prodding, and then actual procedures and the pain and suffering from that and the healing cycle. And
I think
I was talking a level of suffering.
Someone, I think in a 6-year time span, I maybe had 3 weeks off from an appointment, procedure, treatment, whatever. So, and I don't say this to brag at all, because I
brought it up, not you. So that's why. So I want to highlight this. That was my ask.
Yeah.
I'd like our viewers and listeners to really understand their suffering, because it really ties into this need for a higher power. Because I don't think you and I have been friends for a while. I've never heard you bragging about, hey, I'm the greatest sufferer among you or whatever. That's not where you're coming from. Mm-mm. And so the point is to understand, if you are on a journey of suffering, hey, what do you do with that? Like what I'm hearing you talk about is, had it not been for higher power, would you be sitting here today?
Mm-mm. No, I mean, sad you say. Yeah. We've heard that a lot. Yeah. I think without my commitment and not just belief, but entire surrender to my higher power, then I have no idea where I would be. And it's not just surviving, but it's being a non-anxious presence even. Mm-hmm. Like, not only are you not surviving, but how is it you're at peace? I take no credit for that, other than, behold, I stand at the door and knock, opening up and saying, Jesus, come in. That's it. Otherwise, and then clinging, we'll talk about that next time, but I don't take any credit with it. And this has been my cross to bear. This has been just a journey that God has had for me. A lot of us have unbelievable journeys in lots of different areas. Like we had Wes on the podcast last week, and a cerebral palsy has him in a wheelchair for his entire life, and he's 45.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a journey.
Oh, yeah. A journey of suffering.
Yes. Yeah. Dependence, suffering, the whole thing. Vulnerability, everything.
Yeah. And to do that without hope or a higher power, it just seems mind-numbing to go through that without hope and a higher power. And I do want you to, if you'll speak for a few minutes, we talked before, and we've done a whole episode on the resurrection and the afterlife a little bit, but this is important. One of the things the Sadducees did not believe in was resurrection of the dead, that there was a future hope. And so, and there's something important about this, I think, to grab hold of for your own journey, is like part of being able to release to God is to have a hope in something greater. One of the things I'm going to I'm going to rabbit trail off for just a half a second. I want to come back to this as you're thinking about, maybe what you want to say on that. And I know that you have your own experiences and you've done a lot of reading in this too. And so I think it's probably important to hear about. But a lot of people don't recognize that the Sadducees were the power brokers of the temple in Jesus' day. And so it was really fascinating to me to think about the people who had the most control over the Jewish religious structures had no belief in an afterlife. They had no belief in, this power that comes from God. And what that meant is that they were working for their own power. And so, and you look at what was happening at the temple when Jesus showed up, they literally were selling sacrificial offerings to people to gain power to themselves. So their focus had moved away from understanding the real source of power to garnering power for themselves. And as they garnered power from themselves, they didn't matter who they hurt. People that were coming who had great need and who were literally seeking to meet God and be in his presence, they would basically rob them while they were there for their own power. And they used that in a way that was very harmful. And so I say that because it really leads you when you deny a higher power, and we can look at our own society and those who deny a higher power, that when you begin to live for just yourself in the here and now, you become power hungry. You become self-seeking, self-centered. And when you think about it, are those people that you want to spend your time with? Power hungry, self-seeking, self-centered, people who are willing to hurt others to gain power for themselves. The exact opposite of who you would like to hang out and spend time with. And so I think we can all say there's something really important about recognizing the importance of having a higher power in our lives, because it brings towards a deep empathy, humility, and understanding of others around us from our own journeys. And so, but you've taken some time to really study the importance of afterlife and your own views on it, and it's given you hope. And so I'm going to bounce back over to you.
I'm just going to go back to my formative years for just a sec. And my dad is 100% Italian, and for them, death was this Catholic view, but it was this tragic event. And sometimes widows would wear black for the rest of their lives or for that year or whatever. But when my dad talked about it, he'd be like, oh boy, they died. And my mom's family they just didn't talk about emotions and stuff. So it was like an English kind of a thing. And so it was a stiff upper lip, so we didn't really talk about death with that at all. And so
you had the two extremes, the two edge cases here. Okay.
And so I think my view was one of being terrified of death. And I remember, I think one of my greatest fears was like to have cancer somewhere in my family and to experience a cancer journey with death. A huge fear. And in fact, when I was newly married and Leslie and I were down in Texas, she had a beautiful aunt named Susie who at the age of 42 passed from stomach cancer. But one time when we were down visiting her, she was hooked up to an IV. She was all bloated from treatment, and I couldn't even look at her, and I couldn't process what was going on. I was paralyzed by fear. Usually I'd be, right next to her and loving on her and her loving on me, kind of a relationship, but I couldn't. And so even though I had heard about eternal life, that kind of thing, growing up in the church and everything, for me, it's like, well, I don't want to go to a hospital. I don't want to go to hospitals. I think the first time I was at a wake and saw a body, I wanted to run out of the room as quickly as I could. I didn't understand this concept that there was this body lying there and it was motionless and it was dead. What happened? And so it wasn't until Then Mom got terminal cancer, and I did the journey with her. And then when she passed, I had to process with her journey, the fact that there is a soul and a spirit. I came down to that. Okay, there's a soul, spirit. This is a shell, and something lives on. That's what I believed, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, Mom went someplace, and she, she has a faith in Jesus. She has a relationship with Jesus, and I think she went to heaven, and that whole concept. But then when I got really, my cancer became terminal. When it became metastatic, they said, that's it, That's when I really had to wrestle with, the prospect of what's this thing that happens at death. And I think drilling down into, you can look at the rabbinical, the Christian, whatever scholars, at what they say about death. You can look at the medical community, what they say physically, what happens, but there are there's so much evidence out there of people who have had an experience of dying, leaving their bodies, and then coming back into their bodies. It's like overwhelming. You can deny, you can say this is happening in the brainstem, and some kind of consciousness, but even when the brainstem is gone, people have had these experiences of leaving their body and coming back in. And some, there's a lot of commonalities, and there are differences with it. But so I think for me, as I face my own passing, it was important for me to do this research and to get an assurance of what happens after death. And so it's built on a foundation of, yes, my Christian faith, I believe in Jesus, Scripture, all that, and it's also built on the testimony of many people and what I know to be true about having a soul and spirit that are eternal. And what fascinates me is when Jesus raises people from the dead and all that. I'm like, Jesus, could you have asked them, Lazarus, what was it like? Or, but we have these NDEs,
I got to think that people in the day did ask.
Yeah.
I mean, like if
probably was,
there's probably a lot of conversation on this.
Hey, let's go over to this house. Lazarus is going to talk about his
experience of death. Yes.
Yeah.
It does sound interesting.
But I mean, so now when I get the prospect of another cancer diagnosis, recurrence, whatever's going on, I know that when I close my eyes for the last time, I'm going to be in the presence of just an unbelievable place with an unbelievable Savior, and almost something I'm to look forward to. Although I don't want to. Yeah, it isn't like
You've ran a cancer support group for many years, and so you've been at a lot of moments of these final moments too, and there's been a lot that's been miraculous there. I was thinking as you were talking to about my experience with Jack here, who passed from pancreatic cancer just a short while back, and I had that vision of getting to walk Jesus to walk Jack to the gates of heaven, and I let go of his hand. It was he was putting his hand into Jesus's hand, and it was such a great vision as he went to glory himself and to the next phase. And I totally believe that was a vision from God, and Jack affirmed that with me too when we talked about it. And it was, but you had said to me that, hey, this experience of this end of life journey would be one of the most rewarding experiences. They're not for the faint of heart in one sense, because you have to lean into hard emotions and the difficulty, but it is a rewarding journey because there's a spiritual journey and there is something real.
Yeah, I mean, hospice people know, and people see relatives in the room before they pass, things like that.
Yeah.
Things that you can't explain rationally or scientifically either. But I think the phrase, there's no atheists in foxholes. I mean, I think that when death is imminent, that's a crossroads for any person.
Yeah.
And personally, am I just going to be placed in the earth and that's it, and I'm done? I don't personally believe that.
Well, you just told me a story, I think last Friday, about one of those experiences where you had somebody who was basically, I'm not a believer, I'm not in that space. And then when they got to that final moment, and they had to confront what was real.
Oh, you mean the one where I was involved with? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not trying to share something that's not mine,
Yeah.
but I remember you sharing this with me just a week ago. The story. That's the reason why I was like, you got some stories from these end of life journeys.
Excuse me. Yes.
That are just amazing. When you see, and so you're 100% convinced, hey, that there's a higher power, and the Sadducees are sad because they don't believe in a resurrection power, and that's really important.
Yeah.
That there's a power greater than ourselves, that's greater than what we have in our earthly realm. Mm-hmm. And that gives great hope. And I think that's important for a cancer journey, especially because cancer, really is a life or death disease experience.
People look at me and they say, "Oh, you're strong." Dude, I am a coward. I mean, I literally, if I didn't have my higher power, I would be frightened as anything at the prospect of cancer, this whole journey thing, without knowing where I'm going after I die. I would be one frightened person.
That's good. No, what you're sharing is not good. We're going to talk a little bit about, I actually want to delve into that in our next session a little bit, because I think it ties in with something that we're going to wrestle with, something that is, I think maybe it's a tougher theological concept in this sense, and it's going to be in the space of how do you access God's power, and what does it look like? And
so is that the Pharisee part of it? Beware the leaven of
no, actually, the leaven of the Pharisees is interesting, and you and I both there's two things that were missing from the Pharisees, and the key one was they denied the Messiah as Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And so, and you see this interaction that Jesus has with them. It's in Matthew 22. They have this joust, and Jesus asks them, "Hey, what do you say about the Messiah?" And the response is, "He's the son of David." He's like, "Is that so? That's interesting. So if he's the son of David, how is it in the Psalms that he says, 'The Lord says to my Lord,' and David recognizes that it's actually Yahweh says to Adonai, and Adonai was the Messiah. How is it that he is David's son and still David's Lord?" And they didn't have an answer. In fact, they were so shocked by his question, they never asked him a question again, because the amount of brilliance in his answer was he basically showed them right there in the scripture where the Messiah was going to be a son of David and also Lord. And it wasn't something they could digest. And Jesus as Lord, as our higher power, is such an important part of our faith. And that was the leaven of the Pharisees, was that plus they lacked something. And that was they were working in their own power. And their work in their own power was that they had developed all these rules and regulations to work their way to heaven, or to right standing, to righteousness. And Jesus put out this before he had that interaction with them. He tells this great story, and the story was a story of a wedding supper. And the wedding supper, the king puts out a wedding invitation for all the important people of the land, those that should get an invite, and they all blew him off. And so he was like, "Hey, send out invitations to wherever you can." And not only did they blow him off, some of them, the people that brought the invitations, were killed. And so he was really angry, and so he punishes those that killed those who those who killed the people who were bringing invitations. But he invites all these other people to the wedding supper, people that, from all over, but they were very poor, and they all show up. But in the very end of the story, there's a weird little thing. There's this guy who shows up who doesn't wear any wedding clothes. And he comes up to the guy and he's like, "Hey, friend, why don't you have any wedding clothes? What are you doing here?" And it says he bound up this guy and he threw him out into outer darkness. And you're like, what is that? Who is that person? And that is the person who is not clothed in the righteousness of Christ. And so when we build our own self-righteousness, then we're clothing ourselves in our own power. And it's like showing up at a wedding banquet without wedding attire.
Wow,
it's a really loaded thing. And then he has this exchange that I just told you about later on, where he shows them who he is. And I think the biggest thing that's missing from the Pharisees, though, is they didn't have the ability to love. And so those two things really are the leaven of the Pharisees. And people who are pursuing power generally don't have the ability to have love and care for others. And so, man, to focus on Jesus's power and that higher power, one is embracing the fact that there is a power, and it's a resurrection power, and it's big, and it's not something that you can strive for and earn. It's something that we're clothed in his righteousness. That's an important power as you come, because you can't have peace if you're working towards your own righteousness, because you're always going to recognize that.
Yeah, it comes full circle back to that surrender concept. Yeah. Dependence.
Yeah.
And surrender. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me that that he never asked them a question again. And that's exactly what the parable that was before, he said, when he asked the guy, "Hey, friend, how did you get here? What are you doing here without wedding garments?" The man didn't have an answer. And neither did the Pharisees when he asked them about his own deity. And so this is just an important concept of understanding. And I think you might say, well, why are we talking about this in Cancer Pieces a little bit? Is I started out by saying, hey, if you were to go to like an AA, you would be asked to identify a higher power and to put your trust in it. I think it's important that higher power is real. Because if you put your trust in this camera or door or in something that's not real, it might give you a false sense of security, but it doesn't have the ability to give you real hope. And that, I think, is important for our conversation, because if you're going to have peace, you need to have real hope. And, I've talked to people who've been in recovery circles, and they kind of mock almost. It's like sometimes somebody will come in without a belief in Jesus, and almost in a mocking way, well, I'm going to make something that's an inanimate object my higher power, just so I can do the program. But it's kind of mocking the point. But if your higher power doesn't have power, you're kind of just doing a delusional game on yourself.
Yeah, because I think the founders of AA and stuff it was based on Christian.
Yeah, they were
Christian beliefs. Yeah. So when they referred to God as the higher power, that's what they were, not an inanimate object.
I wanted to be careful, because
that's
there is
a great
something
point.
There's power in there's a lot of good in the 12 steps, even of just walking through. In other words, taking accountability for the harms you've done, and taking an inventory of these great issues that have happened in your life, and taking ownership for them, and then trying to release those. There's something really important in some of those 12 steps, and you and I have done the 12 steps in a Christ-centered approach. But there's healing just in walking through levels of I'm almost going to call it like natural laws. There are natural laws that God has put into the universe, and if you follow those natural laws, it's going to bring healing, even if you don't have the belief in that God. If you follow His laws, it's going to bring some form of hope and healing.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that a bit in the accessing God's power, but it's really, when I start looking at this question about is there power and what's important about it, the leaven is denial or self-seeking. It's I have the power and I'm going to try to earn my own way.
Yeah.
And both of those are kind of the same thing.
Yep.
They're both a form of self-reliance of I have the power and I don't need another power.
I mean, yeah, and Jesus was like, take up your cross and follow me, deny yourself.
Yes. That's an important part of the next leg of the journey. It's like, hey, once you recognize that there's a power greater than yourself and you're willing to trust, put your life in it and follow, then at that point in time, it opens some doors. And that's, I think, what we're going to talk about in the next episode a bit.
Great. Good stuff, Sean. Good job.
So we'll wrap this episode up for here. And so I think our message here is like, if you want to find peace, and peace comes when there's great hope, and great hope is when you recognize there's a power greater than yourself who wants the best for you. And if you can put your trust in that higher power, there's great peace there and joy and so much more. So that'll be it for today. If you want more info or more resources, go to cancerandpeace.com and catch up on future episodes. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.